Essentially international cooperation. And there is an expression in English which we don't have an equivalent of in Russian, the last but not least, which means the last in order but not least in importance. And it is great pleasure for me to invite to the podium our guest from Africa. We hadn't yet talked about Africa, but Africa is extremely important for today's world. The Minister of National Defense and Army Restoration, Ms. Marie-Noëlle Koyara from the Central African Republic.
Mes meilleures salutations à tous les participants.
I would like to welcome all of the participants of the conference on behalf of my delegation, on behalf of my country, and my own behalf. I would like to thank the Minister of Defense of Russia for the invitation extended to my country to take part in this exchange of opinions on issues of security and stability in the world. This is the topic that is of interest to us, especially given that my country now really needs both peace and security. Let me dwell on what country I represent. What is the Central African Republic? My country is in the dead center of the African continent. Our square area is 625,000 square kilometers, and the population is about 5 million people. It's a very resources-rich country. We have a lot of natural resources, mineral deposits, and we focused our development on developing livestock farming and agriculture. Unfortunately, our reforms have not been adapted to our realities, and that pushed our country towards active utilization of mineral resources. As soon as our country adopted this course of development, crisis erupted. There was a whole string of crises that really tore our country apart, and that led to the most important crisis in our history in 2012. I'm talking about a crisis that led to a lot of casualties, a lot of people who lost their lives. Many women got killed, many religious actors died. You probably remember that picture. The woman carries her stuff on her head, not knowing where to go. Children that lost connection with their parents had to become members of militant groups. And I told you that we had previously been concentrated more on agriculture and livestock breeding. Unfortunately, during that crisis, the shepherds that were supposed to herd our livestock were supposed to carry not just a stick or a cane, but to carry weapons, because even doing that required them to be armed. So a shepherd with a firearm is now a picture of the day. So I'd like to reiterate that if you are an agricultural country, security is of primary importance. During the crisis of 2012, our armed forces were slapped with an embargo. And that's why you understand why our ministry is called the Ministry of National Defense and Army Restoration, Army Reform. We are restoring our armed forces. During our period after the crisis, we started training programs for our armed forces. Unfortunately, we do realize that an army cannot perform its functions without proper armaments and arms and weapons. And to get to peace, we need to have a properly equipped army. Our president, the president of our republic, spoke to many actors, but we couldn't get the necessary equipment and weapons. The only country that didn't say no to us was the Russian Federation. That helped us with the equipment for 4 battalions of Central African Republic's armed forces. Every time we go to international conferences, the very first question we hear is, what is the basis of this cooperation between the Central African Republic and Russia? I wish they had asked us about how our people lived that were living through a crisis. That's something that should worry them, and rather than asking us about what's the basis for our cooperation with Russia. I think this is a question that doesn't make sense. Russia is one of our main partners. Since 1963, it has been the case. The topic that causes concerns for us, well, actually there are several of them, multiple topics, worry us. Since the beginning of the crisis, we noted 2 trends. The very first one of them is that livestock farmers that could have their herds, roam freely. Now they have to defend themselves and defend their livestock. These people come from different countries. They have different origins. The other thing that you have to keep in mind when you analyze the outcome of the crisis, you have to understand how those militant groups act. They attack villages, they kill religious leaders, they put houses on fire, and among those militant groups are a lot of foreigners who came from neighboring countries. When you analyze what they do in our country, you don't have a doubt that we have terrorist organizations that are active in our country. But being in the very center of Africa, our country doesn't have a strong enough army to control its borders. It's a country that's going through a profound reform and is going through the process of restoring itself. What can we do to terrorists that come to us? We are limited in what we can do, and these militant groups can then propagate their influence on all of the neighboring areas. That causes us a great deal of concern. And when we see how those terrorists act on our land, how they act in Mali and Burkina Faso, we can say that dozens of people get killed, that they lose their lives every day. These terrorists that essentially flock into groups, they want to be one step ahead of us. You just listen to our colleague from Congo-Brazzaville. He spoke about the importance of the regional institutions. He spoke about the tools that can be used to achieve peace on the regional scale, and we believe that this tool for achieving peace in the region should continue being developed so that these countries, neighboring countries, could have tools to help each other and counteract these attacks. We mentioned Boko Haram, the terrorist group that is active in the Central African area, and if we could win them or win over them, it's only because Cameroon, Chad, and Nigeria joined their forces to be winners in this fight against Boko Haram terrorists. Of course, external help really helped strengthening us. We believe that this is an example that should be followed and it should be scaled up. We will be developing our system of observers so that we could be ahead of the terrorists, one step ahead of them. They have their own networks, I mean the terrorists, and our country needs a system of monitoring that would allow us to control our territory, and we should do this in partnership with our neighbors, because it is hard for us to stand against these attacks on our own, and I think that's something that should bring us together And that's a general concern. No one is guaranteed from this, is immune from this on the world scale. And I would like to use this opportunity to appeal to you all, to call upon us all, those of us who are concerned with the need of preserving peace and stability and security in the world. We need to extend our hands to each other, help each other, to make sure that we can restore peace and security when half, or at least a part of the world, is emblazoned, or rather is ablaze with conflict. We cannot stand aside. And essentially, we would welcome any help with the restoration of our national armed forces that would then be able to protect the people and preserve our borders. I would really be invaluable. And I would like to talk to all of those present here that we are now trying to develop international cooperation on sub-regional level to make sure that these local unions could have the ability to counter these terrorist attacks. And before I complete and conclude my presentation, I would like to extend my words of condolences to all victims of terrorism around the entire world. And the recent attacks in Sri Lanka, specifically the ones that really shocked us. A lot of people died. We mourn for them, but we want to become more effective. We want to be more cohesive, and we want to be working together. And if we do this on international scales, we can turn things in the right direction and overcome. And that completes my presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.